In the years leading up to December 1941, the Pacific Ocean was more than just a stretch of water, it was a chessboard where two ambitious powers, the United States and Imperial Japan, maneuvered for dominance. Japan's expansionist vision had been in motion since the early 1930s, beginning with the occupation of Manchuria in 1931. This was followed by the full-scale invasion of China in 1937, a brutal conflict that revealed Japan's determination to secure resources and territory at any cost. The United States watched these developments with growing concern. American policymakers understood that Japan's aggressive moves threatened not only China but also the balance of power in the Pacific. However, throughout the 1930s, Washington maintained a policy of isolationism. The memory of World War I's toll still haunted the public, and intervention in foreign conflicts was deeply unpopular. Yet, economic pressure became America's weapon of choice. By 1940, Japan's dependence on imported oil, steel, and rubber made it vulnerable. The U.S., alongside Britain and the Netherlands, imposed export restrictions aimed at curbing Japan's war machine. These measures intensified after Japan signed the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy in September 1940, openly aligning itself with the Axis powers. Tokyo's military leadership saw the tightening embargo as an existential threat. Without secure access to oil, Japan's fleet, the core of its imperial ambitions, would be paralyzed within months. Negotiations with the U.S. continued, but deep mistrust poisoned every meeting. For Japan, time was running out, and its leaders began to view war as not only inevitable but necessary. The seeds of Pearl Harbor were being sown long before the first bombs fell. This was a clash of strategic visions. Japan sought dominance in Asia, the U.S. sought to maintain a status quo favorable to its interests. Both sides believed they were acting in self-defense, but their definitions of it were fatally different. And as we trace the path toward that fateful Sunday morning in December 1941, we invite you to stay with us. If you want more deep-dive historical breakdowns like this, subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with fellow history enthusiasts. Your support helps us keep bringing you the stories that shaped our world. By mid-1941, diplomacy between Washington and Tokyo was hanging by a thread. Japan's leaders, Prime Minister Fumimaro Kono and his cabinet, faced a grim choice: accept American demands to withdraw from China and Indochina, or find a way to secure vital resources by force. For them, retreat was politically impossible. The military factions within Japan's government would not tolerate abandoning the empire's hard-won gains. In July 1941, Japanese forces moved into southern French Indochina, threatening British Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, regions rich in oil, rubber, and tin. This aggressive expansion triggered the United States' most decisive response yet. On July 26, President Franklin D. Roosevelt froze all Japanese assets in America, effectively cutting off Japan's access to oil. Britain and the Netherlands quickly followed suit. The embargo was an economic noose, and Japanese naval planners warned that their fuel reserves would last less than 2 years. That summer, in secret meetings in Tokyo, military strategists outlined a bold plan. If negotiations failed, Japan would strike swiftly across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, seizing resource-rich territories before the United States could respond. The key was to neutralize the U.S. Pacific Fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Without that fleet, Washington would struggle to project power into the Western Pacific, buying Japan the time it needed to consolidate its conquests. Negotiations continued into the autumn. Special envoys traveled to Washington, hoping for a compromise. Yet the U.S. insisted on a complete Japanese withdrawal from China, a demand Tokyo viewed as national humiliation. By late November, Emperor Hirohito gave reluctant approval for war if talks collapsed. Meanwhile, Admiral Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet, was refining his Pearl Harbor strike plan. Trained in the United States and well aware of its industrial might, Yamamoto knew that a quick, decisive blow was Japan's only hope. His daring proposal called for a surprise air assault from 6 aircraft carriers, launching hundreds of bombers and torpedo planes to cripple America's battleships in a single morning. On November 26, 1941, the Japanese attack fleet quietly sailed from the Kuril Islands, heading into the North Pacific. Their orders were clear: if peace was not achieved by December 7, they would attack. No further diplomatic breakthrough came. The die was cast. The stage was now set for a Sunday morning that would change the course of history. The following hours would see a nation jolted from peace into war. At 6 a.m. on Sunday, December 7, 1941, the first wave of Japanese aircraft roared off the decks of 6 carriers positioned 230 miles north of Oahu. The skies were clear, the seas calm, perfect conditions for the strike. Commander Mitsuo Fukuda led the assault, his aircraft broadcasting the coded signal Tora. 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 Tiger. 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 Confirming total surprise had been achieved. At 7:55 a.m., the first bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. The target list was clear: America's battleships moored along Battleship Row, airfields at Hickam, Wheeler, and Ford Island, and key fuel and repair facilities. Within minutes, chaos engulfed the base. The USS Arizona took a direct hit from an armor-piercing bomb, detonating her forward magazine. The explosion tore the ship apart, killing over 1,100 men instantly. Nearby, the USS Oklahoma capsized after multiple torpedo hits, trapping hundreds of sailors inside. Anti-aircraft crews scrambled to their guns, but most weapons were unmanned and ammunition locked away in peacetime storage. By 8:10 a.m., thick black smoke choked the harbor as fires raged aboard the California, West Virginia, and Nevada. 30 minutes later, the second wave arrived. Dive bombers and high-level bombers struck surviving ships and airbases, targeting anything left intact. In just 2 hours, the Pacific Fleet lay shattered, 8 battleships damaged or sunk, over 180 aircraft destroyed, and 2,403 Americans dead. Yet, despite the devastation, key objectives had been missed. None of America's aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, were in port that morning. The submarine base, dry docks, and oil storage tanks also escaped major damage. This would prove critical in the months ahead. In Tokyo, news of the success was greeted with celebration. In Washington, the shock was immediate and visceral. That afternoon, Japanese envoys arrived to deliver their final message, hours too late to disguise the attack as anything but a deliberate act of war. The United States, a nation deeply divided over foreign conflict just the day before, was now united in outrage. The next day, President Roosevelt would address Congress, asking for a declaration of war against Japan. The Pacific was now a battlefield, and the sleeping giant had been awakened. On December 8, 1941, less than 24 hours after the attack, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed a joint session of Congress. His words, "a date which will live in infamy," became immortal. The vote for war against Japan was nearly unanimous. Across the nation, enlistment offices were swamped as young men, many still in high school, volunteered for service. The shock of Pearl Harbor had transformed America from a hesitant bystander into an active combatant overnight. The U.S. Navy began immediate salvage operations in Hawaii. Divers worked in oil-slick waters to rescue trapped sailors aboard capsized ships. Engineers repaired airfields and strengthened coastal defenses. While Pearl Harbor remained scarred, it was still operational, allowing the Pacific Fleet to recover far faster than Japan anticipated. Meanwhile, Japan capitalized on its early advantage. Within days, its forces struck across the Pacific. On December 8, the same day as Roosevelt's speech, Japanese aircraft attacked the Philippines, crippling U.S. air power there. Guam, Wake Island, and Hong Kong were also under siege. In Southeast Asia, Japanese troops landed in Malaya and Thailand, pushing toward Singapore. Their goal was clear: create a vast defensive perimeter before America could regroup. Back in Washington, U.S. military leaders debated strategy. Some urged a direct counterattack in the Central Pacific. Others, including Admiral Chester Nimitz, favored a defensive buildup, buying time to train new crews and commission modern ships. Aircraft carriers now became the centerpiece of American naval doctrine, a shift accelerated by Pearl Harbor's lesson that battleships alone could not decide the war. By early 1942, U.S. industry shifted into overdrive. Factories that once made automobiles now produced tanks, aircraft, and ships. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, symbolized by Rosie the Riveter. War bonds financed the massive mobilization effort, while rationing ensured the home front shared the burden. The Pacific War was no longer a limited regional conflict. It was a struggle for control of an ocean spanning thousands of miles, fought across jungles, islands, and coral reefs. Japan had seized the initiative, but the United States now possessed the industrial and human potential to challenge and eventually reverse those gains. The road to victory, however, would be long, brutal, and filled with setbacks. In the first months of 1942, the stage was set for a series of decisive battles that would determine the fate of the Pacific. One of them, fought in the waters near a small atoll called Midway, would change the course of the war. By the spring of 1942, Japan seemed unstoppable. In just 6 months, it had carved out an empire stretching from Burma to the Solomon Islands. Its navy controlled vast stretches of the Pacific, and Allied forces were reeling. Yet beneath the surface, cracks in Japan's strategy were beginning to appear. Tokyo's leadership faced a fundamental dilemma. Their lightning offensive had delivered spectacular territorial gains, but it had not destroyed America's capacity to fight. The United States, with its enormous industrial base, was already replacing losses and expanding its armed forces at an unprecedented rate. Japanese planners understood that time was not on their side. The Imperial Navy sought to draw out and annihilate what remained of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Admiral Yamamoto believed a decisive battle would secure Japan's dominance and force Washington to negotiate. His plan targeted Midway Atoll, a small but strategically vital outpost guarding the approach to Hawaii. Capturing it would extend Japan's defensive perimeter and lure American carriers into a trap. In Washington, however, U.S. cryptographers at Station HYPO had broken key elements of Japan's naval code. By late May 1942, Admiral Chester Nimitz knew that Midway was the target and prepared an ambush of his own. This intelligence coup would prove decisive. Meanwhile, the morale of American forces was rising. The Doolittle raid in April 1942, though militarily minor, had struck the Japanese homeland and boosted Allied confidence. For Japan, it underscored the need to eliminate American carriers before they could mount further offensives. As the first week of June approached, two great fleets converged. On June 4, 1942, the Battle of Midway began. In just a few hours of intense combat, American dive bombers crippled 4 Japanese carriers, the very same ships that had struck Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier. The loss of their experienced aircrews was a blow from which Japan would never fully recover. Midway did not end the Pacific War, but it shifted the balance irreversibly. From that point forward, Japan would fight largely on the defensive, while the United States pressed its growing advantages in men, material, and industrial power. The attack on Pearl Harbor, intended to secure Japan's future, had instead set in motion the events that would lead to its eventual defeat.